that you would help us to grow in you, and that you would help us to be the servants you have called us to be. In your most precious Son's name, amen. So in case you missed last week, kind of summarize what we talked about, and please understand, it's not going to cover all the details. I'm not going to re-preach last week's sermon, so you can, breathe a sigh of relief there. But I kind of wanted to go back because I want to launch from there. So we kind of came up with 4 things that we kind of looked, when we looked at last week, we said, look, we talked about what it meant to make me a servant. And the thing we started with was those who are genuinely humble before God, who turn to Him in absolute dependence, will be assured of a place in His kingdom. Number 2, we said that those who show compassion on behalf of the needy and hurting will receive a return much comfort in their own lives. And number 3, those who are gentle, strong within, yet controlled without, who bring a soothing graciousness, will win out. And finally, we said, those who have a passionate appetite for righteousness, both heavenly and earthly, receive from the Lord an unusual measure of personal contentment and satisfaction. So one of the things that we've been looking at is what it means to be a servant, to be the kind of servant that God calls us to be. Because ultimately, that's what we desire. That's our total desire, is to be men and women of God, to be called of God. And so I want to look at, we're going to be kind of jumping over a little bit. We're going to start with Matthew 5. And so we're going to be looking at what it means to have a portrait of servanthood. Now, understand, a portrait is a picture of what that thing really looks like. A portrait is not designed to be fake or to be phony. It is real. And because it is real, it gives us a true picture. A portrait shouldn't be different from the thing it intends to portray. Okay? So Matthew 5:7 says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." The word for merciful means more than just sympathy or compassion. Okay? What that means is the word indicates a personal and a deliberate identification with the pain and problems of others until we see things as they see them and feel things as they feel them. Compassion basically equals the pain of love. Those special servants of God who extend mercy to the miserable often do so with much encouragement because they can identify with the suffering. I think some of the most meaningful people who minister to the homeless are those who've been homeless. Those who've gone down that path and they understand it. But again, that portrays Jesus, because what was Jesus? Jesus understood our sorrows. He's well acquainted with our griefs because he went through everything we did. Okay? So instead of watching for a distance or keeping the needy at arm's length, they get involved and they offer assistance that can alleviate some of the pain. You know, what James 2:15 says, if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? In other words, folks, as a believer, we're supposed to identify with the needs of those around us. We're supposed to be there to help them, to lift them up, to encourage them. Years ago, there was a young man, and he was so discouraged. He just felt like nothing was worth living for. He didn't have any hope. He had grown up around the church, and he'd heard all the stuff, you know, all the platitudes, and you know how you just tough it up, and how you just need to believe in yourself, and all those other things. And so he decided he was actually on the verge. He had written a suicide note. He was talking about taking his own life. And one of the gentlemen in the church came over to visit him. Not a big deal. He came over and he got to talking to him, and they kind of befriended him. And so they decided that, you know, they were talking about his needs and his hurts. And so this guy, you know, took him in and kind of took him around the shoulder and helped him, and he started taking him out to dinner, and he started helping him do things around the house, and he invested in him, and the guy started to see the true love of Christ. It wasn't so much that he needed the help, but he needed somebody there to walk alongside him, to encourage him. And we all need that. But people who not know Christ don't have Jesus to encourage them. When I was still doing youth ministry, and that was a billion, trillion, zillion years ago, we had a kid in my youth group who nobody liked. I mean, he was just mean and miserable and nasty, and he was always causing problems. And I had talked to him several times, and I was at my wit's end what to do with him. And we were having this discussion in youth group one day about how Christianity is more than it is an action verb. It is not something you just sit around and talk about. It's you can get involved in people's lives. In fact, we used to have this thing. Our youth group was called Dunamis, and so we had this thing: Dunamis Dynamite, Dunamis Power, and power was a kind of an acronym. And one of the things was engaged with them in their walk. And one of the kids in my youth group really took that to heart. She decided that that was going to be her mission field. It was to work with those who were discouraged. And so she picked on this guy, and he didn't really have much to do with Christianity. He kind of came because his parents made him, and he didn't really want anything to do with Jesus. And he was got in all sorts of trouble, and he had, he was always constantly, getting in fights and always having problems. And she took him, and she kind of encouraged him, and she kind of walked with him, and she befriended him. And as she became engaged in his life, then he began to engage with her and began to engage with Jesus. And eventually he became a Christian, because all she did was encourage him and walk alongside him. And sometimes I think we think that we have to have some kind of deep theology in order to witness, when what sometimes it means is that we need to be Christ for them. In other words, we need to reach out and touch them. I keep looking at Lazarus, or not Lazarus, but the lepers, and you need to understand something about the lepers is that, when you had leprosy in those days, you weren't allowed to go near anyone. In fact, they were driven out of the cities, and if for some reason they had to come near people, the Jewish law required them to scream unclean everywhere they went. So nobody hugged them, nobody touched them, nobody held them, nobody gave them any kind of encouragement, because they were just basically waiting to die. Yeah, love. Thank you, John. One of the words of love language, right? Words of affirmation. And remember Jesus? What's he do to one of the first lepers he heals? Is it just that he says, "Be healed," and go away? No. What does he do? He touches him. He reached out and put his hands on him and healed him. Why did he do that? Well, Jesus didn't have to do that. He could have said it from a distance. "Oh, no, stay over there, I'll heal you." No, because he was healing more than just leprosy. He was making contact, and we all need that sometimes. One of the things I used to love, and we don't do this anymore in my church because it's gotten to the point where people got kind of weird about it, but I miss, we used to get up and, "Well, I want you to hug somebody around you." It didn't have to be, so we'd get up and we'd hug each other. And sometimes for some of the people in that church, it's the only time they got physical contact, the only time they got that kind of encouragement, because their lives were so empty and so single that nobody else had anything to do with them. That's why it says in 1 John 3:17, "But if anyone who has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him?" True servants are merciful. They care. They get involved. They get dirty if necessary. They offer more than just words. Clean hands, dirty feet, all part of one body. We're here to encourage and to build, and if it means we got to get dirty to do it, we get dirty to do it. Because sometimes people need to know that God loves them. And the thing is, what they get in return is mercy. And not just from God, but from other men. If ever in position to judge, find as much on the side of mercy as possible. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, according to Matthew 5:8. That's our next step, is we need to be pure in heart if we're going to be servants, right? The Beatitude, like the poor in spirit, deals with the inner man. Beatitudes are not physical things you do. They're, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the merciful. All those things, as part of that verse, means that we are dealing with the inner person. Okay? It doesn't refer simply to doing the right thing, but to doing the right thing for the right reasons. We have a lot of people in church who do what they do to be seen doing it. They're more worried about what people see them doing than they are actually being an encouragement and building each other up. And folks, we're the body, and the body requires encouragement. It requires love. Right? It should produce fruit, just like Morgan said last Friday. Thank you, John. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Doing things without hypocrisy, falseness, or pretense. Okay? We are pure in heart because we're going to do this because we love that person. We may not like them very much. They may be somebody that we just have a real problem getting along with. But we're not called to like them. We're called to love them. We're called to treat them like Jesus would have treated them. What did Jesus? When yet we were his enemies, Christ died for us. So, and pure means clean, uncontaminated, without corruption. God despises the contamination of the heart, evidenced by hypocrisy, especially in those who claim to serve him. If you are claiming to be a servant of God, and yet you're a hypocrite, you say one thing and do another, you're not living out your faith. And you're not really proving that you're a follower of Jesus Christ. Let me give you a perfect example. Years ago, there was a guy, you may have heard of him, his name was Mahatma Gandhi. Heard of him? Okay. Mahatma Gandhi actually went to college in the United States, and he was taken in by the Christians at the college he went to, and they kind of ministered to him and cared for him. And he was very impressed with Jesus. And he really was considering it, and he was really thinking about it. And then, once he graduated, he got sent to South Africa. And so he decided he was going to visit a Christian church there because he had gotten used to going to a Christian church at the school that he went to near Princeton. And so he was just, he just decided he was going to go. So he went to Africa. And he went down to this church. And when he got to the door to come in, there were these 4 white guys standing there. These 4 great, big. And as he started to go in, they stopped him. I'm sorry, your kind aren't welcome here. Well, isn't this the church? Yeah, but your kind don't come to this church. This is for white people only. And they literally screamed at him and yelled at him and threw him out. Mahatma Gandhi said, I love Jesus, I just don't think I love his followers. I like what Jesus stood for, and he walked away from that. And so they were hypocrites because they allowed the color of somebody's skin to determine whether they ministered to them or not. And I'm sorry, that's just not faith. So what's the promise of the pure in heart? They will see God. God will reveal himself to them, and they will be able to see him and receive him because there is nothing there to distort or contaminate the revelation. So many people walk away from Jesus not because they've had a problem with Jesus, but because they've got a problem with his servants. Now understand, we're not perfect, and I understand that. We're going to fall on our faces all the time. That's reality. But if you're not honest enough to say, look, I messed up, beg your forgiveness. Be able to humble yourself to those who you offend. Okay? We're not talking about winning a political contest. We're talking about living for Christ, showing them love even when they show you hate. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Number 4 actually. Blessed are the peacemakers. Number 3. they shall be called the sons of God. So what does that mean? Well, first off, it's the only time in the New Testament where the word peacemaker actually appears. It's nowhere else. Peacemaker does not mean avoiding all conflict or confrontation, being laid back or easygoing and relaxed. It's not a peace at any price philosophy. It's not passive and compromising when surrounded by those who disagree. This is not about agreeing with everybody. So what does a peacemaker do? Well, the peacemaker, first off, has to be at peace with himself. Right? He's not agitated. He's not filled with inner turmoil. He's not abrasive. Can you do that on your own? Is this a God-sized assignment? Yes, it is. Because God's the only one who does this. And the only way you're going to do this is if you allow God to be in control. Not agitated, not filled with inner turmoil, not abrasive. Why? Because you're approaching them in Christ's love. And that peace with yourself means that you've accepted the peace with Christ. So what does a peacemaker do then? He is one who works to settle quarrels, not start them. He's accepting and patient, does not find pleasure in being negative. Look at what it says in Ephesians 4:1. Peacemakers are those who are endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. That's what peacemakers do. They endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit, in other words, to make it harmony in the bond of peace. Now, for the world outside there, they don't know what real peace is. They may see peace all the time, but they don't get it. They don't understand it. They don't have any idea. You know why? Because they don't know the Prince of Peace. And where it all settles is where how you get to be a peacemaker is you've got to start with knowing the Prince of Peace. You can't do this in your own strength or in your own power. You know peace. Okay? So peacemakers build up, right? That's what they do. They don't tear down, they build up. Proverbs 4:1. Every wise woman builds her house, but the foolish plucks it down with her hands. The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down. Every wise woman. Yeah. Thank you, John. Number 2, they build up, they watch their tongues. Yeah, their goal is to heal and not hurt. Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. And then 16:1. Pleasant words as a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones. Okay? So they build up, they watch their tongues. That's why James says that the tongue is a gateway to hell. It carries with it the sting of death. And you can't control it, but God can. God's the only one who can, so this is a God-sized thing. You need to learn to watch your tongue, not because you're working really hard at it, because it's a sign that you are under submission, that you are under control of somebody else, and that his name is God. So, number 3, you're slow to anger. Proverbs 15:18. A wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeases strife. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit shall be than he that taketh the city. Get that? I mean, they're slow to anger. They're not hot-tempered. They're not filled with strife. They're slow to anger. They quiet contention. And then contrast that with Proverbs 25:28. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Okay? So, a peacemaker is slow to anger. They watch their tongues. They build up. And they are humble and trusting. What is the promise to peacemakers? Well, Proverbs 28:25 says, a greedy man stirs up strife, but the one who trusts in the Lord shall be enriched. I like the English Standard Version of this. It says, but he that put his trust in the Lord, the King James, shall be made fat. That's the English Standard Version you got up on your notes. But the King James says, he that is proud has a proud heart, stirreth up strife, but he that putteth his trust in the Lord shall be made fat. Okay, now, before you run out and say, Guess what? Pastor Mike says if you're a peacemaker, you'll be fat. That's not what it says. You understand the culture this is talking to. The King James, the fat is the idea that in those cultures, food is so scarce that an evidence of prosperity is large size. So the reality is that poor people are skinny because they have a hard time getting food. It's only the rich who get any weight because they've got extra food to eat. It's very different than America, right? We look at people and we say, well, there's something, you're fat, so you're. But it's a very different type of society. But it's not talking about you should go out and try to be fat to prove that you're humble and trusting. Okay. So what is the promise to peacemakers then? What is promised? Praise the Lord, it doesn't say obese. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Well, it says, because we are peacemakers, we're going to be called the sons of God. Okay? Few things are more like God-like than peace. When we promote it, we pursue it, we model it, we are directly connected with God and His character. Understand, being a peacemaker is not something you do. It is something that God does through you. It is an evidence that you are under God's control. Look at what it says in Matthew 5:10. Blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So that's our character, called sons of God. We are called the sons of God because we make peace. Peace doesn't mean accepting everything everybody else does. Oh, no, we don't want any strife, so therefore we don't care about truth. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about being models of what God is like. Were people always excited, and did God do everything they wanted to do? No. God said, I call you to be peace, but I call you because I'm aiming to restore peace between you and Him. Because ultimately, the best form of peace is the fact that God made peace with us by sending His Son to die on the cross. We were yet His enemies, and yet God sacrificed His only Son so that we might know what it means to be a believer. So, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay? All right, so those who genuinely desire to serve others soon find that being mistreated for doing what is right is not the exception, it is the rule. I hate to tell you this, but when you follow after Christ, when you walk in His path, when you take up your cross daily, people are going to take advantage of you. And I'm not sure there's a way around it. People will take advantage of you if you serve them. Look at what it says. It doesn't say if men revile you. It says when they revile you. Okay? When they're persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't say, hey, look, this might happen. There's a possibility that because you serve me, because you follow after me, you might get persecuted. It doesn't say if. It says when. That news for you, folks. Being a peacemaker means that people are going to look at you funny. They're going to say, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that girl? They're going to revile you for it. They're going to hate you for it. In this world, you will have trials and tribulations. You're very right, John. Okay? So if men revile, it's not if, it's when. But he also says he promises you a great reward for patience and maturity in enduring the persecution. Look, know that, yeah, there are going to be times when you will be persecuted for your faith. In America, we've gotten kind of relaxed about it because we don't think about it. But the reality is that across this world, there are Christians dying for their faith right now. How many of you realize that in Iraq, there's a rather large Christian community that's been there since the 1st century? In Iraq. Now, they're attacked and belittled and persecuted, and they break out in persecutions all the time. And they stay in hiding. because they get caught in a primarily Muslim country, there's a death penalty. But they still live out their faith on a day-to-day basis. They walk in hardship because they know